You are not struggling because life is hard, but because you wake up and let untrained thoughts govern your entire day before you scroll or react. Understand that your mind is already shaping your suffering through judgments you never examine. You are about to learn 10 morning Stoic principles that train you to take control of your attention, separate what is yours from what is not, and return your life to reason and virtue before the world can distort it. These are not ideas for inspiration, but disciplines for daily conduct that must be practiced the moment you wake. If you value clarity over confusion and self-governance over reaction, stay here and train with this practice daily. Subscribe and remain with this work as part of a community that chooses discipline over drift. What follows will confront how you begin your mornings and how that beginning has been shaping everything that follows. Number 1. Accept only what lies within your control today. You woke up this morning and immediately handed your peace to things that were never yours to control. Before your feet touched the ground, your mind was already chasing outcomes. You worried about how people would respond to you. You replayed old conversations. You imagined future problems. You carried fear into a day that had not yet even begun. And then you ask why your mind feels heavy. You ask why your spirit feels weak. You ask why peace escapes you no matter how hard you chase it. Look carefully at your life. The suffering exhausting you is not coming from reality itself. It is coming from your refusal to accept the limits of your control. You are trying to command people who do not obey you. You are trying to predict events no human being can predict. You are demanding certainty from a world that owes you none. You wake each morning not as a disciplined human being, but as a servant to external things. That is why your mind has become restless. That is why you cannot sit quietly with yourself. That is why even small inconveniences disturb your peace. A person who cannot separate what is theirs from what is not will remain a prisoner no matter how successful they appear. They will blame the world for wounds created by their own judgments. They will spend years fighting battles that only exist inside their own mind. They will become angry when life refuses to obey their expectations. They will fear loss because they built their peace on fragile things. They will become bitter because they thought control over life belonged to them, but it never did. You do not control whether people understand you. You do not control whether others approve of your choices. You do not control whether the world rewards your effort fairly. You do not control whether people stay loyal. You do not control whether your plans unfold exactly as imagined. You do not control the weather. You do not control the economy. You do not control the opinions spoken behind your back after you leave the room. And yet every day you suffer because you keep demanding authority over these things. Look honestly at your anger. Most of it comes from expecting reality to behave according to your desires. Look honestly at your anxiety. Most of it comes from trying to secure outcomes before they arrive. Look honestly at your disappointment. Most of it comes from believing you are entitled to a result that was never guaranteed. This is the beginning of freedom, not the freedom to control life, but the freedom from needing to. The disciplined mind begins every morning with one clear division. There are things within my control and things outside it. My thoughts are mine. My judgments are mine. My actions are mine. My character is mine. My willingness to act with courage is mine. My ability to remain just under pressure is mine. My choice to speak honestly is mine. My decision to govern myself is mine. Everything else belongs to the world. And the moment you truly accept this, your suffering begins to weaken. Notice what happens when you stop demanding control over other people. You stop chasing approval like a starving man. You stop becoming emotionally destroyed by criticism. You stop wasting hours replaying conversations trying to force others to see you differently. You understand that another person's opinion belongs to them just as your judgment belongs to you. Their praise cannot improve your character. Their insults cannot corrupt it unless you allow them to. This is why the disciplined person becomes difficult to shake. Their peace no longer depends on unstable things. Right now, your mornings may be ruled by emotional confusion because you wake without philosophical direction. Your mind immediately becomes reactive. One message changes your mood. One memory steals your peace. One fear controls your attention. You rise from bed already defeated because you have not trained yourself to examine your thoughts before believing them. The first task every morning is not checking your phone. It is not chasing stimulation. It is not searching for distraction. The first task is to remember who governs your inner life. You must sit with yourself before the world enters your mind. You must remind yourself what belongs to you and what does not. Before speaking to anyone, say this quietly to yourself. Today I will control my judgment. Today I will control my actions. Today I will control whether I meet difficulty with reason or weakness. Nothing else belongs to me. Feel the seriousness of this. Most people live their entire lives without learning this distinction. They grow old while remaining emotionally controlled by external events. They become adults physically while remaining children mentally. Every inconvenience becomes a personal attack. Every criticism becomes emotional collapse. Every uncertainty becomes panic. Do not live this way. A disciplined person understands something the undisciplined mind resists. Peace does not come from controlling the world. Peace comes from controlling your response to the world. This is why two people can face the same hardship while one collapses and the other remains steady. The difference is not the event. The difference is judgment. One person believes hardship should not exist and becomes bitter. The other accepts hardship as part of life and focuses only on meeting it honorably. Your life changes when you stop asking why things happen to you and start asking how you will respond to them. Someone disrespects you. What belongs to you is whether you answer with dignity or emotional chaos. Plans fall apart. What belongs to you is whether you adapt with reason or complain like a child demanding certainty. You experience loss. What belongs to you is whether you collapse into self-pity or continue living according to virtue despite pain. This is the discipline you must practice every morning because the world will test you before the day is over. Someone will disappoint you. Something will not go according to plan. Your comfort will be challenged. Your patience will be tested. Your ego will be wounded. And if you begin the day without remembering what is within your control, you will immediately become a slave to circumstance. Train yourself to pause before reaction. This single habit will reveal the condition of your mind. When anger rises, pause. When fear appears, pause. When insult arrives, pause. When temptation pulls at you, pause. Then ask yourself one question. What here actually belongs to me? You will discover that most emotional suffering begins the moment you attempt to control what never belonged to you in the first place. Your attention is precious. Stop handing it to everything that demands emotional reaction. The world profits from your distraction. Weakness grows when attention is scattered. Strength grows when attention is disciplined. A person ruled by impulse cannot govern themselves. They wake and immediately surrender their mind to noise. News controls them. Social media controls them. Desire controls them. Fear controls them. They live as if every external event deserves emotional access to their inner world. But the disciplined person guards the mind carefully because they understand something most people never learn. Attention shapes character. Whatever repeatedly controls your attention eventually controls your life. This is why mornings matter so deeply. The first thoughts of the day often become the direction of the entire day. If your morning begins with fear, your mind will search for reasons to remain afraid. If your morning begins with resentment, your mind will search for reasons to remain angry. But if your morning begins with disciplined judgment, your mind becomes harder to disturb. Sit quietly for a few minutes each morning before the world reaches you. Ask yourself, what difficulties may come today? Someone may insult me. Someone may misunderstand me. I may experience delay, frustration, inconvenience, or disappointment. Then remind yourself that none of these events possess the power to corrupt your character unless you surrender your reason to them. This is not pessimism. This is preparation. The unprepared mind expects life to obey its preferences and becomes shocked when difficulty arrives. The prepared mind expects challenge and therefore remains steady when it appears. Look honestly at how much energy you waste resisting reality. You replay the past even though it cannot be changed. You fear the future even though it has not arrived. You resent people for acting according to their own nature. You demand certainty from an uncertain world. Then you wonder why your mind feels exhausted. Your exhaustion comes from fighting life itself. Accepting what lies outside your control does not mean becoming passive. It means directing your energy where it can actually produce strength. You cannot control outcomes completely, but you can control effort. You cannot control whether people stay, but you can control whether you act honorably. You cannot control whether hardship arrives, but you can control whether hardship destroys your integrity. This is where dignity is found, not in comfort, not in praise, not in perfect circumstances. Dignity is found in self-governance. The strongest person in the room is often the one who has mastered their own reactions. They are not easily provoked because they do not believe every insult deserves emotional surrender. They are not destroyed by uncertainty because they never expected life to provide guarantees. They are not dependent on constant approval because they built their self-respect through action, not applause. You must become this kind of person deliberately. It will not happen accidentally. Every morning, your mind must be trained like a disciplined soldier preparing for battle. Not battle against other people, but battle against weakness within yourself. Against laziness, against emotional indulgence, against blame, against resentment, against fear, against the desire to escape responsibility for your own mind. The greatest conflict in your life is not with the world. It is with the undisciplined part of yourself that keeps demanding control over what was never yours. Pay attention to how quickly your mood changes based on external conditions. This reveals attachment. When praise lifts you too high, criticism will destroy you too deeply. When comfort becomes necessary, discomfort will feel unbearable. When external success becomes your identity, failure will break your spirit. But when your peace comes from governing your own mind, external events lose much of their power over you. This is why inner discipline matters more than external achievement. A person may conquer business, wealth, reputation, and status while remaining emotionally weak. One insult can ruin their day. One failure can destroy their confidence. One rejection can make them question their worth. That is not strength. That is dependency wearing expensive clothes. Real strength appears quietly. It is the ability to remain governed by reason when emotion demands surrender. It is the ability to act rightly without needing recognition. It is the ability to endure uncertainty without panic. It is the ability to lose external things without losing yourself. You build this strength one morning at a time. Tomorrow morning when you wake, do not rush into distraction. Sit upright. Breathe calmly. Remind yourself that your mind will either become your master or your servant, depending on what you practice daily. Then say this honestly: I do not control the world today. I control how I meet it. I control whether I act with integrity. I control whether I abandon reason. I control whether I become weaker through complaint or stronger through discipline. Nothing outside me can corrupt my character without my permission. Carry this into your day. When traffic delays you, remember what belongs to you. When someone speaks unfairly, remember what belongs to you. When anxiety enters your mind, remember what belongs to you. When plans collapse, remember what belongs to you. Your judgment belongs to you. Your response belongs to you. Your character belongs to you. Protect these carefully because they are the foundation of freedom. Do not wait for life to become easier before practicing this discipline. Difficulty is the practice. Every frustration gives you the opportunity to examine yourself honestly. Every inconvenience reveals the condition of your mind. Every moment of anger exposes attachment to control. This is why hardship can become useful when approached correctly. It reveals where your discipline still fails. It shows you where emotion still rules over reason. It exposes where your peace still depends on external conditions. Do not run from seeing this. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding honest self-examination because it forces responsibility upon them. They prefer blaming circumstances because it protects the ego from truth. But truth is where freedom begins. You are responsible for your judgments. You are responsible for your reactions. You are responsible for the condition of your inner life. No one else can govern your mind for you. The world may wound your body. People may disappoint you. Fortune may change without warning. But your character remains yours unless you abandon it willingly. Understand the urgency of this while you still have time. Days are disappearing from your life, whether you are prepared or not. You do not know how many mornings remain, yet many people continue wasting them in distraction, resentment, fear, and emotional slavery to external things. Do not waste another morning this way. Wake with discipline. Wake with philosophical clarity. Wake remembering that peace is earned through self-governance, not granted by circumstance. Accept what lies within your control today and release the rest without bitterness. That single decision can change the direction of your entire life, because the moment you stop trying to govern the uncontrollable, you finally become capable of governing yourself. Number 2. Judge every morning thought before it judges you. The moment you wake, your mind is already speaking before you have chosen to speak back. It does not ask permission. It does not wait for clarity. It begins immediately with judgments about your life, your future, your body, your problems, your responsibilities, and the people you will encounter. And if you do not take command at that exact moment, those unexamined judgments will quietly become the governing force of your entire day. You are not disturbed by life itself. You are disturbed by the judgments you attach to life before you have examined whether they are true, useful, or within your control. A thought appears and you accept it as reality. A feeling arises and you treat it as instruction. A fear enters and you behave as though it is prophecy. This is how the mind becomes its own enemy without ever realizing it. You must understand this with complete seriousness. Every action you take today will begin as a judgment in your mind. If that judgment is distorted, your action will be distorted. If that judgment is weak, your behavior will be weak. If that judgment is uncontrolled, your life will feel uncontrolled. There is no separation between the quality of your thinking and the quality of your existence. This is why your first discipline each morning is not action but examination. Before you move into the world, you must turn inward and observe the raw material of your thinking, not to obey it, not to suppress it, but to question it with complete honesty. The untrained mind wakes up already convinced of things it has not verified. It assumes today will be difficult before any difficulty has occurred. It assumes people will disappoint you before they have even spoken. It assumes you will fail before you have even acted. These are not truths. They are unexamined judgments repeating themselves automatically because no one has interrupted them with reason. And if you do not interrupt them, they will guide your reactions like invisible commands. A disciplined mind begins differently. It treats every thought as something that must earn acceptance, not something automatically trusted. It does not confuse mental noise with truth. It does not confuse emotional intensity with accuracy. It does not confuse imagination with reality. Instead, it creates a pause between thought and response where reason can intervene. In that pause, freedom exists. Most people never enter that pause. They live inside immediate reaction. They wake, and the first fear becomes their mood. The first irritation becomes their attitude. The first memory becomes their emotional state. They spend the entire day responding to internal impulses as if those impulses were unquestionable authority. They are not living deliberately. They are being moved by mental habit. You must begin to see your thoughts as judgments, not commands. A judgment can be true or false. It can be useful or harmful. It can be examined or rejected. But it is never automatically correct simply because it appeared in your mind. This single distinction changes everything. When you wake tomorrow, do not allow your mind to run forward unchecked. Sit with it. Observe it as if you are meeting it for the first time. Notice how quickly it tries to define your day without evidence. Notice how it predicts outcomes it cannot possibly know. Notice how it labels situations before understanding them fully. Then do something most people never do. Question it directly. Is this thought within my control or outside it? Is this judgment based on fact or fear? Is this interpretation helping me act with clarity or pushing me toward confusion? Does this thought strengthen my character or weaken it? You are not trying to eliminate thinking. You are training thinking to obey reason instead of impulse. Your suffering often begins at the level of interpretation, not event. Two people can face the same situation and experience entirely different realities because they interpret it differently. One sees delay and assumes disaster. The other sees delay and continues calmly. One sees criticism and assumes personal attack. The other sees criticism and evaluates whether there is truth in it. One sees uncertainty and collapses inward. The other sees uncertainty and prepares to act with discipline. The difference is not external conditions. The difference is the quality of judgment. You have allowed automatic thoughts to become your identity. A moment of doubt appears, and you say, "I am not capable." A moment of discomfort appears, and you say, "I cannot handle this." A moment of frustration appears, and you say, "This day is going badly." You have turned passing impressions into permanent conclusions about yourself and your life. This is how the mind becomes fragile. But nothing in your immediate experience proves those conclusions. They are interpretations layered on top of reality, and interpretations can be corrected. The first correction is recognition. You are not your first thought. You are the awareness that observes it. If you can see the thought, you are not identical to it. That separation is the foundation of inner discipline. Once you understand this, you stop reacting blindly to mental content. You begin responding deliberately to what deserves attention and dismissing what does not. A trained mind does not believe every internal voice. It listens, evaluates, and only then decides whether to act. This is not suppression. This is governance. A chaotic mind allows every thought to speak as authority. A disciplined mind requires justification before obedience. Each morning you must practice this governance intentionally. Before engaging with the world, spend a few minutes observing the flow of your own thinking without immediately following it. You will notice patterns, repeated worries, familiar complaints, old interpretations that return without invitation. These are not truths. They are habits of perception, and habits can be changed. When a judgment arises, such as today will be too difficult, do not accept it. Examine it. What evidence supports this? Has the day even begun, or is this fear predicting an outcome that has not occurred? When a judgment arises, such as people will not respect me today, pause. What is being assumed here? Have I seen the entire future of human interaction for today, or is this insecurity projecting itself forward? When a judgment arises such as "I am behind in life," stop. Behind compared to what standard? Who defined that timeline? Is this a fact or a comparison driven by external pressure? This process is not about positive thinking. It is about accurate thinking. Stoic discipline does not replace one illusion with another. It removes illusion entirely and replaces it with clear perception. You will notice something important when you begin practicing this. Many of your emotional reactions lose intensity, not because life becomes easier, but because your interpretations become clearer. Fear weakens when it is questioned. Anger dissolves when it is examined. Anxiety loses power when it is exposed as prediction rather than fact. The mind that examines itself becomes harder to disturb because it no longer believes everything it produces. There is another layer to this discipline that requires honesty. Many of your judgments are not accidental. They are chosen because they support avoidance. The mind often creates negative interpretations to justify inaction. If a task feels difficult, the mind calls it impossible. If a conversation feels uncomfortable, the mind calls it pointless. If a responsibility feels heavy, the mind calls it unfair. These judgments protect comfort but weaken character. You must be willing to challenge not only false fear, but also convenient interpretation. Ask yourself whether your judgment is helping you avoid responsibility. The undisciplined mind often disguises avoidance as wisdom. It says now is not the right time when it simply does not want effort. It says I am not ready when it simply does not want discomfort. Truth requires confrontation with this tendency. The disciplined person does not allow emotional resistance to define reality. They act according to reason even when emotion disagrees. They recognize discomfort as part of training rather than a signal to stop. They understand that judgment must be guided by principle, not preference. As your practice deepens, you will begin to notice a gap forming between thought and reaction. In that gap, you will no longer be forced to obey the first interpretation that appears. You will have time to choose, and in that choice lies your freedom. This is what most people never experience. They believe freedom is external. They believe it depends on circumstances aligning with desire, but real freedom is internal. It is the ability to observe your own mind without being ruled by it. The world will still present challenges. Your body will still feel discomfort. Other people will still act unpredictably. But none of these things can determine your response unless you surrender judgment to them. This is why morning discipline is essential. If you begin the day without examining your thinking, you enter the world already under the influence of unchallenged mental patterns. You react instead of choose. You assume instead of verify. You judge without awareness. But if you begin by questioning your thoughts, you enter the day with clarity. You are no longer dragged by interpretation. You are directing it. Sit tomorrow morning before distraction enters your mind and watch your thoughts as they arrive. Do not follow them immediately. Let them speak and then respond with reason. Some will dissolve once seen clearly. Others will require correction. A few will reveal truths you can act upon. But none should be accepted without examination. This is the practice of governing your inner world. Over time, this discipline reshapes your entire life. You become less reactive. You become more deliberate. You stop turning every thought into emotional reality. You stop letting internal noise define your day. You begin to live from examined judgment rather than automatic reaction. And slowly you realize something that changes your relationship with yourself. The mind is not your enemy. It is simply untrained. And what is untrained can be guided, but only if you are willing to question it before it questions you. Dhond Sria no, Dhond sorry mia Surya di sa tres ndorifuri menius. New Adame Faios remes, for the word, no misum porsan supportis and se bulido. Number 3. Choose virtue over comfort in every choice. You already know what comfort feels like. It feels like delay when action is required. It feels like silence when truth should be spoken. It feels like avoidance when responsibility appears. And every time you choose it, you do not simply rest. You weaken the structure of your character, one decision at a time. Your suffering is not created by hardship itself. It is created by how often you abandon what is right in exchange for what is easy. You call it convenience. You call it timing. You call it stress management. But beneath those names is the same pattern repeated in different forms. You choose what protects immediate ease instead of what strengthens long-term integrity. This is how character is quietly lost, not in dramatic collapse, but in repeated small concessions where comfort is allowed to override reason. A difficult conversation avoided today becomes a fractured relationship tomorrow. A necessary effort delayed today becomes regret in the future. A truthful action postponed today becomes self-respect weakened over time. You are not punished by life for choosing comfort. You are shaped by it. Every moment presents a division that most people refuse to see clearly. One path strengthens your rational nature and aligns your actions with virtue. The other path preserves ease and protects emotional convenience. Both paths are always available, but only one builds a stable inner life. The other slowly dissolves it. You already know which choice weakens you. You feel it immediately after you make it. A quiet recognition appears when you avoid responsibility. A subtle discomfort rises when you act against your better judgment. That discomfort is not random. It is the mind recognizing the gap between what is easy and what is right. Most people learn to ignore that signal. They call it overthinking. They call it pressure. They call it anxiety. But it is simply awareness of self-betrayal that has not yet been justified away. Virtue is not an abstract idea. It is the alignment of your actions with reason, even when emotion resists. It is the refusal to let comfort dictate direction. It is the decision to act according to what is necessary rather than what is pleasant. It is the discipline to remain faithful to your rational nature in moments when avoidance feels more attractive. Comfort always speaks first. It speaks softly but persistently. It tells you to wait until you feel ready. It tells you to avoid discomfort until conditions improve. It tells you that effort can be postponed without consequence. And if you listen long enough, you begin to believe that hesitation is wisdom. But hesitation is often fear wearing the language of caution. A disciplined mind learns to recognize this pattern before it becomes behavior. When you feel resistance to doing what you know is right, that is the exact moment where your character is being formed, not later when the task is completed, but in the decision itself. The struggle you feel is the space where virtue either grows or weakens depending on your response. You must begin to observe how quickly your mind negotiates with discomfort. It does not say, "I refuse to do what is right." It says, "I will do it later." It says, "I need more preparation." It says, "I am not in the right state of mind." These are not neutral observations. They are attempts to preserve comfort at the expense of discipline. If you trace your patterns honestly, you will see how often your life has been shaped not by what you could not do, but by what you chose not to endure. You avoided discomfort and called it wisdom. You avoided confrontation and called it peace. You avoided effort and called it rest. But in reality, you were choosing the temporary safety of ease over the lasting strength of action. Virtue requires a different standard. It does not ask whether something feels comfortable. It asks whether it is correct. It asks whether the action strengthens your character or weakens it. It asks whether you are acting in accordance with reason or surrendering to impulse. When you begin living this way, you will notice a tension arise in ordinary decisions. You will feel the pull toward ease in moments that require effort. You will feel the temptation to remain silent when truth should be spoken. You will feel the desire to retreat when responsibility demands engagement. These moments are not obstacles to your growth. They are the exact places where growth becomes possible. Each time you choose comfort over virtue, you teach your mind that avoidance is acceptable. Each time you choose virtue over comfort, you strengthen your capacity for self-governance. Character is not formed by intention alone. It is formed by repeated action under pressure. There is a misconception that virtue should feel natural. It often does not. The rational part of you may know what is right while the emotional part resists it. This internal conflict is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that you are at the point of decision where identity is being shaped. If you always follow what feels easy, your mind will become trained to avoid difficulty. If you consistently choose what is right despite discomfort, your mind will become trained to endure difficulty without losing direction. You are always training something, either discipline or avoidance. Examine your daily behavior closely. Notice how many actions are driven by the desire to reduce discomfort rather than the pursuit of what is correct. Notice how often you choose distraction over focus, silence over honesty, delay over responsibility. These choices may appear small, but they accumulate into the structure of your life. A life governed by comfort becomes fragile. It depends on conditions remaining favorable. It collapses when difficulty appears because it has not developed the strength required to meet it. A life governed by virtue becomes stable because it is not dependent on comfort to function. It is guided by principle, regardless of circumstance. This is why inner strength is not built in moments of ease. It is built in moments where you choose what is right, while everything in you resists it. You must begin practicing this immediately in ordinary situations. When you feel the urge to delay something important, pause and recognize what is happening. You are standing at a choice between ease and integrity. When you feel the urge to avoid a conversation that requires honesty, recognize that you are choosing between comfort and truth. When you feel the urge to abandon effort because it is uncomfortable, recognize that you are choosing between discipline and avoidance. The moment you clearly see the choice, you reclaim responsibility for it. Many people act as if their choices are forced upon them by circumstance. In reality, most decisions are shaped by internal preference for comfort. This is why self-awareness is essential. Without it, comfort disguises itself as necessity. With it, you see the real structure of your decisions. You begin to understand that the true struggle is not external. It is the ongoing negotiation between what is easy and what is right. There will be moments where choosing virtue feels costly. You may lose temporary approval. You may face discomfort. You may experience resistance from others. But none of these consequences compare to the cost of consistently abandoning your rational nature. When you betray your own judgment repeatedly, you lose trust in yourself. And without self-trust, even simple decisions become unstable. You begin to doubt your ability to act correctly. You become dependent on external validation because internal clarity has weakened. Virtue restores that clarity. It brings consistency back into your actions. It aligns your behavior with your understanding of what is right. It reduces internal conflict because you are no longer negotiating constantly with avoidance. Each morning you should prepare your mind for this struggle, not as something extraordinary, but as something expected. You will encounter opportunities to choose comfort. You will encounter opportunities to choose virtue. The difference between a disciplined life and an undisciplined one is not the absence of temptation, but the presence of awareness during temptation. When you wake, do not ask how to avoid difficulty. Ask how to meet it without abandoning reason. Do not ask how to make the day easier. Ask how to make your actions more aligned with integrity. This shift in orientation changes everything because it removes comfort from the center of decision-making and places character there instead. Throughout the day, return to this question repeatedly. Is this action guided by ease or guided by reason? Is this response preserving comfort or preserving integrity? Am I acting to avoid discomfort or to remain aligned with what I know is correct? You will notice that clarity increases when you ask better questions. Confusion often comes from avoiding this level of honesty. As you practice this discipline, your tolerance for discomfort will increase. Not because discomfort disappears, but because it no longer has authority over your choices. You begin to see it as part of the process rather than a signal to stop. You become capable of acting without needing emotional approval from yourself first. This is where freedom develops, not in the absence of difficulty, but in the ability to act correctly despite it. Over time, your life becomes less reactive. You stop negotiating with every moment. You stop seeking permission from comfort before acting. You begin to move according to principle rather than impulse. And in that state, your mind becomes steadier because it is no longer divided between what is right and what is easy. There is a quiet strength that emerges in a person who consistently chooses virtue over comfort. They do not need external motivation to act correctly. They do not depend on circumstances being favorable. They simply act in accordance with reason because that is the standard they have trained themselves to obey. You can begin this training today, not in extraordinary events, but in small decisions where comfort and virtue are in conflict. Each time you choose correctly, you strengthen the foundation of your character. Each time you avoid that choice, you weaken it. Your life is being shaped by these decisions more than you realize, and the direction it takes depends on which voice you decide to obey when comfort speaks louder than reason. Why say buseda hosidai ten hampul? Why buseda hosidai ten hampul? Forli nala. Number 4. Practice silence until reason leads your first action. You speak too quickly to yourself. Before the world even touches you, your mind is already reacting, already deciding, already judging, already preparing emotional responses that have not earned the right to exist. You call this instinct. You call this personality. But much of it is unexamined reaction pretending to be identity. If you observe your mornings honestly, you will see that your first actions are rarely chosen with reason. They are triggered. A thought appears and you follow it. A feeling rises and you obey it. A memory surfaces and you relive it. A worry enters and you build an entire imaginary future around it. And all of this happens before reason has even been given a moment to speak. This is why your life often feels scattered even when nothing external is wrong. The mind that reacts before it understands cannot produce stability. It produces noise, and you have mistaken that noise for thinking. Silence is not absence of thought. Silence is the refusal to obey thought before it has been examined. It is the discipline of withholding action until reason has had the chance to lead. Without this discipline, your mind becomes a constant stream of impulses disguised as decisions. You do not suffer because life is chaotic. You suffer because your reactions are faster than your understanding. You respond before you comprehend. You judge before you investigate. You act before you are grounded in reason. This creates a life where your own mind outruns your wisdom. Every unexamined reaction becomes a small act of self-abandonment. You say something you did not mean because emotion spoke first. You agree to something you did not reflect on because pressure arrived before clarity. You withdraw from something important because fear arrived before reason. And each time this happens, you reinforce the habit of letting impulse lead your life. The disciplined mind introduces a barrier between stimulus and response. That barrier is silence. Not external silence alone, but internal silence. The pause where you refuse to move until reason has assessed what is actually happening. This pause is uncomfortable at first, because it interrupts habit. The mind that is used to reacting immediately will feel restricted by silence. It will try to fill that space with urgency, with justification, with emotional reasoning. But that urgency is not truth. It is withdrawal from control. You must learn to remain still long enough for reason to arrive. Each morning you should begin not by engaging the world, but by restraining yourself from it. Before speaking, before reacting, before planning, you observe the raw state of your mind. You will notice it is already active without direction. It is already producing opinions, predictions, concerns, and interpretations. None of these have been verified. All of them are simply appearing due to habit. Do not follow them immediately. Let them exist without obedience. This is the first form of silence. The refusal to turn every mental event into action. Then comes the second form, the deliberate waiting for reason to organize perception. Reason does not arrive in panic. It does not arrive in emotional intensity. It arrives when you stop rushing. It arrives when you are no longer chasing the next reaction. It arrives in stillness. Most people never hear reason clearly because they never stop reacting long enough to allow it space. When you begin practicing this discipline, you will notice something important. The mind will attempt to convince you that immediate reaction is necessary. It will say you must respond quickly to everything. It will present urgency even where none exists. It will try to turn discomfort into emergency. But urgency is often a mask for impulsiveness. A disciplined person learns to question urgency itself. Is this truly important, or is my mind simply uncomfortable with waiting? Does this require immediate reaction, or does it require thoughtful response? Am I acting from clarity or from pressure? Silence gives you the distance needed to ask these questions. Without silence, you live inside every impulse as if it were reality. With silence, you begin to see impulses as temporary mental events that may or may not deserve action. This distinction is the beginning of self-governance. You are not required to act on everything your mind produces. In fact, most suffering comes from doing exactly that. You treat every thought as instruction, every emotion as signal, every fear as warning, and in doing so, you allow internal noise to dictate external behavior. But the mind is not always reliable in its first expression. It reacts based on habit, memory, and emotional conditioning. It does not naturally produce clarity in its first movement. It requires refinement. Silence is that refinement. When someone speaks to you and you feel immediate irritation, silence prevents you from reacting in a way that you will later regret. When you receive unexpected news and feel immediate anxiety, silence prevents you from turning fear into assumption. When you are faced with a difficult task and feel resistance, silence prevents avoidance from becoming decision. In each case, silence is the space where reason can correct impulse before it becomes action. You are not trying to eliminate emotion. You are learning not to be governed by its first expression. Emotion becomes destructive only when it is allowed to act without examination. The practice is simple in structure but demanding in execution. When a thought appears, you do not immediately accept or reject it. You hold it, you observe it, you allow reason to arrive. Then you decide what response is appropriate. This changes the entire architecture of your inner life. Instead of living in reaction, you begin living in evaluation. Instead of being pulled forward by impulses, you begin moving deliberately through choice. There is a moment each morning where this discipline becomes most important. That moment is the transition from waking to action. If that moment is uncontrolled, the entire day becomes reactive. If that moment is governed by silence, the entire day begins with clarity. Before you engage with anything external, sit with yourself and do not rush into mental movement. You will feel the pressure to start the day immediately. You will feel the urge to check, to respond, to engage. That urge is not guidance, it is habit-seeking continuation. Resist it long enough for your mind to settle. In that settling, you will begin to see how many of your usual first actions are not chosen but automatic. Checking information before reflection, speaking before thinking, planning before understanding your own mental state. These patterns create a life that feels busy but not directed. Silence interrupts this cycle. As you practice, you will begin to notice a widening gap between impulse and action. In that gap, something important appears: clarity. Not emotional clarity, but rational clarity, the kind that allows you to see situations as they are, rather than as your immediate reactions interpret them. This clarity is fragile at first. It disappears quickly if you rush, but it strengthens with repetition. The more you practice waiting for reason, the more naturally reason begins to lead. Over time, silence becomes not something you force, but something you rely on. It becomes the space where you return to yourself before acting in the world. Without it, you are easily carried by emotional currents. With it, you regain control over direction. You will also begin to notice how silence changes your speech. When you stop reacting instantly in your mind, you stop reacting instantly with your words. Conversations become more deliberate. Responses become more measured. Regret becomes less frequent because fewer actions are taken without thought. This is not withdrawal from life. It is engagement with life under rational guidance. The disciplined person does not speak less because they are afraid to speak. They speak less because they refuse to let impulse speak for them. Every word becomes intentional rather than automatic. Every response becomes chosen rather than triggered. This shift transforms relationships. It reduces unnecessary conflict. It increases clarity. It removes the pattern of saying things in emotional moments that later require apology. Silence becomes protection against regret. You must understand that silence is not passive. It is active restraint in service of reason. It requires strength to hold back immediate reaction when everything in you wants to respond. It requires awareness to observe thought without obeying it. It requires discipline to wait when urgency feels real. But this strength is what builds inner stability. Without it, you remain at the mercy of whatever appears in your mind first. With it, you begin to govern the sequence of thought, evaluation, and action. Each morning becomes an opportunity to reset this discipline, not by trying to control every thought, but by refusing to act before reason has spoken. That is the core practice. Nothing more complex is required. When you begin your day this way, you will notice fewer impulsive decisions. You will notice fewer unnecessary emotional reactions. You will notice greater consistency in your behavior, not because life has changed, but because your relationship with your own mind has changed. You are no longer reacting immediately to everything that appears within you. You are observing, waiting, and then choosing. That is where your power begins. Number 5. Detach from praise and blame before breakfast. The moment you wake, before you have even chosen how to carry yourself through the day, your mind begins to search for validation. It does not wait for reason. It reaches outward. It imagines how others will see you, whether you will be approved of, whether you will be respected, whether you will be dismissed. And in that early moment, before breakfast, before action, before clarity, you are already allowing external judgment to shape your internal state. This is how a person becomes dependent without noticing it. not through chains or force, but through the quiet habit of measuring their worth through the opinions of others. Praise lifts you, blame disturbs you, approval calms you, criticism unsettles you, and slowly your sense of stability no longer belongs to you. It is distributed across the shifting perceptions of people you cannot control. You do not see it clearly because it feels natural. The mind is trained to care about how it is perceived, but caring and dependency are not the same. Care can be rational, dependency is surrender. And most suffering in daily life comes not from what others say, but from how deeply you allow their words to define your inner condition. When praise reaches you, you rise emotionally without examining whether it reflects truth or merely perception. When blame reaches you, you fall inward without questioning whether it is accurate or meaningful. You allow both to enter your identity without judgment. And in doing so, you give external voices authority over your internal stability. This is not strength, it is exposure. A disciplined mind does not deny that praise or blame exists. It simply refuses to let either determine self-worth. It understands that both are opinions formed outside of its control, and anything outside of control cannot be the foundation of a stable life. Your control lies in your judgment, your action, and your character. Everything else belongs to the world of external perception. Once you confuse these domains, your inner life becomes unstable. You begin to chase approval as if it were necessary for survival. You begin to avoid criticism as if it were inherently harmful. But neither praise nor blame can improve or damage your character unless you allow it to alter your judgment. The real problem is not that people judge you. The problem is that you accept their judgment without examination. Before the day even begins, your mind often rehearses imagined reactions from others. You anticipate approval and feel elevated. You anticipate criticism and feel defensive. You construct emotional responses to events that have not occurred, and in doing so you give external voices influence over your present state without evidence. This is why mornings feel unstable for many people. The mind is already socially engaged before it is rationally grounded. It is already reacting to imagined opinions before it has examined its own principles. It is already living in the reflection of others before it has returned to itself. You must interrupt this pattern at its origin. Before you engage with the world, before you expose yourself to judgment, you must establish a clear separation between what belongs to you and what does not. Your character belongs to you. Your choices belong to you. Your intention belongs to you. The opinions of others do not belong to you. Their praise does not belong to you. Their blame does not belong to you. Their misunderstanding does not belong to you. This separation is not theoretical. It must be practiced consciously each morning until it becomes instinctive. Sit before the day begins and observe how quickly your mind reaches toward imagined recognition. Notice how it wants to be seen positively. Notice how it fears being misjudged. Then bring your attention back to what is actually under your control, not how you are seen, but how you act. Not how you are perceived, but how you choose to behave. Not whether others approve, but whether your actions align with reason. This shift is the foundation of independence from external judgment. When you are dependent on praise, you become unstable in success because you require constant affirmation to maintain confidence. When you are dependent on avoiding blame, you become hesitant in action because fear of judgment restricts your choices. In both cases, your behavior is no longer guided by reason, but by anticipated reactions from others. This is how people gradually lose clarity. They begin to filter their actions through imagined social responses instead of rational evaluation. They ask not what is correct, but what will be accepted. They avoid not what is wrong, but what will be criticized. And over time, their life becomes shaped more by perception management than by truth. But truth does not depend on approval. A rational person acts according to what is right, even when it is misunderstood. They accept that others will form opinions without full knowledge. They understand that praise can be given for wrong reasons and blame can be given for correct actions. Therefore, neither becomes a reliable guide for judgment. What matters is whether your actions align with reason and virtue. Everything else is secondary. When you detach from praise and blame, you are not becoming indifferent to people. You are becoming independent from their interpretations. You can still listen, you can still consider feedback, but you no longer allow it to define your internal state automatically. It becomes information to be evaluated, not identity to be absorbed. This distinction is essential. Without it, every interaction becomes a source of instability. With it, interactions become neutral until examined. In daily life, this discipline must be applied continuously. When someone praises you, pause internally before accepting it as definition of self. Ask whether it reflects truth or projection. When someone criticizes you, pause internally before reacting defensively. Ask whether it reflects truth or misunderstanding. In both cases, the focus is not emotional reaction but rational evaluation. Most people never pause. They absorb praise and blame instantly, allowing external words to bypass reason entirely. This creates emotional volatility. A compliment becomes elevation. A criticism becomes collapse. But neither should have that power. Your self-governance begins when you refuse to outsource your sense of worth to external judgment. Before breakfast, before the day gains momentum, you must set this boundary clearly. You are not defined by how others interpret you. You are defined by the quality of your decisions, and decisions belong entirely to you. This realization changes how you move through the world. You stop performing for approval. You stop avoiding action out of fear of judgment. You begin acting according to principle rather than audience reaction. Your behavior becomes more stable because it is no longer dependent on external feedback loops. You will notice that when you detach from praise, success becomes less intoxicating but more stable. When you detach from blame, failure becomes less destructive but more informative. In both cases, emotional extremes soften because they are no longer reinforced by identity attachment. This is not emotional suppression, it is emotional independence, grounded in rational clarity. The disciplined person understands that external judgment is unavoidable. People will always interpret actions differently based on their perspective. Some will misunderstand, some will approve without reason, some will criticize without knowledge. None of this can be controlled. What can be controlled is whether these interpretations influence your inner stability. Each morning, remind yourself that you will encounter opinions that you did not choose. Some will be positive, some will be negative. Neither category deserves automatic authority over your self-perception. Only reason has that authority. When praise arrives, let it pass through examination rather than absorption. When blame arrives, let it pass through examination rather than resistance. In both cases, your response is not emotional surrender, but rational filtering. This practice slowly removes the emotional dependence that keeps most people unstable. It creates a center within you that is unaffected by fluctuation in external perception. That center is formed by repeated alignment with what is under your control. Your actions, your judgments, your character, nothing else. When you live this way, mornings become clearer. You no longer wake already shaped by imagined approval or disapproval. You wake with attention directed inward rather than outward. You begin the day from stability instead of anticipation of judgment. Over time, something subtle changes. You become less reactive to praise and blame, not because you stop hearing them, but because you stop granting them authority. They become external noise that does not dictate internal direction. This is freedom from social dependence, not withdrawal from society, but release from emotional subordination to it. And in that freedom, reason finally has space to lead your actions without interference from imagined approval or fear of criticism. Before breakfast each day, return to this truth. What others think of you is not yours to control. How you respond is. And in that response lies your only real measure of character. Number 6. Remember death and spend this day well. You woke up today with the illusion of unlimited time again. The mind repeats this deception every morning, as if the day in front of you is guaranteed, as if your presence in it is permanent, as if the continuation of your life is something you own rather than something merely given for a brief moment. And because of this illusion, you delay what matters, you postpone what is difficult, and you waste what is irreplaceable. You do not suffer because life is short. You suffer because you behave as if it is not. Every distraction you choose, every unnecessary argument you enter, every meaningless delay you justify, every act of avoidance you allow, is built on the hidden assumption that there will always be more time to correct it later. That assumption is never examined, yet it governs your behavior more than reason ever does. If you were fully aware that this day might be your last, many of your decisions would immediately collapse. The trivial would lose importance, the unnecessary would lose appeal, the emotional reactions you indulge without question would suddenly feel irrelevant, not because the world has changed, but because your perception of time has become honest. You are not disturbed by death itself. You are disturbed by the idea of it being real in your life, so you push it away mentally. You behave as if acknowledging it will weaken you, when in reality it is your avoidance of it that weakens your character. The refusal to see limits produces indulgence. The refusal to see mortality produces waste. The refusal to see endings produces procrastination in both action and virtue. When you forget death, you live as if your choices can be endlessly postponed. You tell yourself there is always another opportunity to act correctly, to speak honestly, to change direction, to become disciplined, and in that assumption urgency disappears. Without urgency, attention becomes careless. Without awareness of limits, effort becomes diluted. Without recognition of ending, life becomes scattered. Remembering death is not about fear. It is about clarity. Clarity strips away unnecessary weight. It removes the illusion that everything deserves your emotional energy. It forces you to distinguish between what is essential and what is noise. When you are aware that time is not guaranteed, you stop investing it in things that do not contribute to your character. Most of your mental suffering is not created by reality. It is created by how you allocate your attention to things that do not matter. You replay conversations that cannot be changed. You imagine futures that may never arrive. You react emotionally to opinions that have no lasting significance. You carry burdens created entirely by unnecessary mental engagement. If death were present in your awareness as a daily truth, much of this would lose its power immediately. You would not waste time in anger over small offenses because you would see how little time exists to waste. You would not delay important actions because you would recognize that delay is not neutral but a loss of irreplaceable opportunity. You would not postpone honesty with yourself because you would understand that self-deception has no future benefit. The awareness of death does not make life darker. It makes it precise. A precise life is one where attention is directed only toward what strengthens character and fulfills rational duty. Everything else is reduced in importance. This is not detachment from life, but proper placement of value within it. Each morning you must begin by removing the assumption of endless time, not through anxiety, but through recognition. You are not promised the remainder of the day. You are given only the present moment, and even that is not under your control in its continuation. What is under your control is how you use it while it exists. This understanding should not paralyze you, it should sharpen you. When you recognize that time is limited, you begin to act with greater intentionality. You speak more carefully. You choose actions more deliberately. You waste less energy on reactions that do not contribute to meaningful conduct. You stop behaving as if your existence is guaranteed and begin behaving as if it is a responsibility being temporarily held. The undisciplined mind avoids this awareness because it creates discomfort. It prefers distraction because distraction simulates endless time. It prefers postponement because postponement feels safe. It prefers emotional indulgence because it avoids confronting the structure of existence. But avoidance does not change reality. It only delays alignment with it. When you remember death, you begin to see each decision as part of a limited sequence. You cannot do everything. You cannot respond to everything. You cannot preserve every opinion or emotion that arises. You must choose what deserves attention and what does not. This selection becomes more serious when you understand that there is no guarantee of repetition. The idea that you will have time later to correct current neglect is one of the most persistent sources of self-neglect. It allows you to tolerate inconsistency in your actions. It allows you to accept delay in your discipline. It allows you to justify avoidance of responsibility. And all of this is built on an assumption that cannot be verified. When that assumption is removed, clarity emerges. You begin to ask a different question before acting. Not whether something feels comfortable, not whether it can be postponed, not whether it will be easier later, but whether it is worth your limited attention now. This question brings discipline into every action. Even small moments change under this awareness. A conversation becomes more meaningful because you recognize it will not repeat in the same form. A task becomes more focused because you understand it is part of a finite day. A decision becomes more careful because you realize its consequences exist within a limited span of life. This does not mean living in constant fear of ending. It means living in constant clarity about value. When people lose awareness of death, they begin to overvalue trivial concerns. They treat temporary discomfort as permanent suffering. They treat minor inconvenience as justification for emotional collapse. They treat small delays as personal injustice. This distortion comes from forgetting that none of it lasts. The mind that forgets limits, exaggerates importance. The mind that remembers limits, restores proportion. You must begin to notice how often your reactions assume permanence where none exists. A moment of frustration is treated as a defining event. A moment of failure is treated as identity. A moment of discomfort is treated as unbearable condition. But none of these are permanent states. They are passing experiences within a limited time frame. When you see this clearly, emotional intensity decreases not because you suppress it, but because you understand its scale. Each morning, practice this recognition deliberately. Before engaging with anything external, acknowledge that your time is not infinite, not as a threat, but as a fact that corrects distortion. Then observe how your mind responds. You will notice a reduction in unnecessary mental expansion. You will notice less tendency to overreact to minor disturbances. You will notice more focus on what actually requires attention. This is not theoretical. It is practical alignment with reality. When you carry awareness of death into your day, you begin to live with fewer contradictions. You stop acting as if time is abundant while simultaneously complaining about lack of progress. You stop treating distraction as harmless while lamenting lack of focus. You stop postponing discipline while expecting transformation. Clarity eliminates these contradictions. You will also begin to see relationships differently. You will value presence more than performance. You will recognize that time with others is not indefinite. This recognition naturally reduces unnecessary conflict. It encourages honesty. It discourages emotional waste. It brings seriousness into communication without removing warmth. You are not becoming pessimistic. You are becoming accurate. And accuracy is the foundation of rational living. As the day unfolds, this awareness should remain in the background of your attention, not as constant anxiety, but as quiet orientation. You are using a limited resource. Every action either contributes to strength of character or drains it through distraction. There is no neutral use of time in a rational life. This understanding does not demand perfection, it demands direction. You will still face temptation to delay, to avoid, to react emotionally, to engage in unnecessary concern, but now you will see these impulses for what they are. Not urgent truths, but habits that ignore limits. Each time you remember death in this way, you return yourself to proportion. You restore balance between what matters and what does not. You bring your attention back from illusion into reality, and in that return, life becomes more deliberate, more focused, and more aligned with reason. Not because time has changed, but because your awareness of it has finally become honest. Number 7. Endure hardship without complaint and keep your character. You already know what discomfort feels like. It arrives without permission. It enters your plans, interrupts your expectations, and exposes how fragile your patience becomes when reality refuses to align with preference. And in those moments, your true character is not revealed by what you intend, but by how you respond when things do not go your way. Most suffering is not created by hardship itself. It is created by the additional layer you place on it, through complaint, resistance, and internal rejection. The event happens, then the mind judges it as unfair. Then it repeats that judgment until the situation becomes heavier than it actually is. You are not only experiencing difficulty, you are multiplying it through interpretation. This is where your inner life either strengthens or collapses. When hardship appears, you reveal whether you are guided by reason or by impulse. Reason says, accept what has happened and respond with clarity. Impulse says, resist what has happened and express frustration. Reason asks what action remains possible. Impulse asks why this should be happening at all. One builds strength through engagement. The other weakens strength through resistance. Complaint is not harmless expression. It is a withdrawal from responsibility. It is the mind refusing to meet reality as it is and instead creating an emotional narrative around it. Every complaint is a signal that attention has shifted from action to resistance, and in that shift, your capacity to respond effectively decreases. You must see this clearly. Hardship is not the true burden. Your reaction to hardship is the burden. The disciplined person does not waste energy arguing with what has already occurred. They understand that events outside their control are fixed in the present moment. No amount of emotional resistance will alter them. What can still be shaped is response, and response is where character is formed. When you complain, you are not changing the situation. You are reinforcing the belief that reality should conform to your preference. This belief creates continuous dissatisfaction because reality will never consistently obey preference. The result is a life spent in repeated frustration over things that cannot be controlled. But when you endure without complaint, something different happens internally. You stop dividing experience into acceptable and unacceptable in emotional terms. You begin dividing it into controllable and uncontrollable in rational terms. This shift removes unnecessary suffering. It does not remove difficulty, but it removes the additional weight of resistance. Hardship is always testing one thing above all else, not your comfort, but your character, not your preference, but your discipline, not your desire for ease, but your ability to remain aligned with reason when ease is no longer available. Most people fail this test quietly through complaint. They believe they are simply expressing frustration, but in reality they are training their mind to resist reality instead of engaging it. Over time, this habit weakens resilience. The mind becomes less capable of facing challenge without emotional distortion. You must reverse this training. The first step is recognition. When discomfort arises, observe whether your immediate response is acceptance or complaint. Not external complaint alone, but internal resistance, the subtle mental rejection that says this should not be happening. That sentence alone is the root of unnecessary suffering. You do not control whether difficulty appears. You do not control whether circumstances align with your expectations. You do not control whether plans succeed without interruption, but you do control whether you add judgmental resistance to what is already present. This distinction must become automatic. Each morning, before entering the demands of the day, you should prepare your mind for inevitable friction, not by predicting specific events, but by accepting that nothing external is guaranteed to remain smooth. Delays will occur, people will act unpredictably, tasks will become difficult, plans will shift. This is not misfortune. It is structure of reality. A prepared mind does not react with shock when reality behaves as reality. It responds with readiness. When hardship arrives during the day, the undisciplined mind immediately seeks someone or something to blame. It searches for reasons to justify emotional reaction. It tries to externalize discomfort so it can avoid responsibility for response. But blame does not reduce difficulty, it only delays engagement with it. The disciplined mind does not search for blame, it searches for action. It asks what is still under my control within this situation. It redirects attention away from resistance and toward response. In doing so, it converts difficulty into practice rather than suffering. Endurance is not passive suffering. It is active stability under pressure. It is the ability to remain internally governed by reason while external conditions fluctuate. It is the refusal to let discomfort dictate character. Without this discipline, every inconvenience becomes an emotional event. A delay becomes frustration. A mistake becomes self-criticism. A challenge becomes avoidance. Life becomes a sequence of reactions rather than deliberate actions. But with endurance, hardship loses its authority over your inner state. It still exists, but it no longer defines your response. You remain anchored in reason even when conditions are unstable. You must also recognize how complaint weakens perception. When you complain, attention narrows to discomfort. You stop seeing available actions because you are focused on what is wrong. This reduces your effectiveness. You become less capable of solving problems because your attention is consumed by resistance instead of solution. Endurance expands perception. It allows you to see more clearly because attention is not trapped in emotional rejection. You begin to see options that were previously hidden by frustration. You become more capable not because circumstances improve, but because your mind becomes less obstructed. There is also a deeper cost to complaint that most people ignore. It slowly damages self-trust. Every time you respond to difficulty with emotional resistance instead of rational action, you reinforce the belief that you are not in control of yourself under pressure. This belief weakens confidence in your own judgment, but every time you endure without complaint and act with clarity, you strengthen trust in your ability to remain steady regardless of circumstance. This internal trust becomes the foundation of resilience. Hardship itself is temporary. Your response to it shapes something far more lasting. It shapes your character. And character is not something that appears in favorable conditions. It is revealed under strain. You must therefore begin to treat every difficulty as a moment of training rather than interruption. When something becomes inconvenient, instead of reacting emotionally, you observe it as practice in maintaining rational control. The goal is not to eliminate difficulty, but to refine your response to it. This requires a shift in identity. You are no longer someone who demands ease. You are someone who maintains reason under difficulty. This identity does not depend on external conditions. It depends on internal discipline. When you adopt this approach, even small inconveniences become opportunities to strengthen character. A delay becomes a chance to practice patience without complaint. A mistake becomes a chance to correct without self-indulgent frustration. A disagreement becomes a chance to respond without emotional escalation. Each moment of hardship becomes a test of whether you remain aligned with reason or surrender to reaction. You must also learn to distinguish between acknowledgement and complaint. Acknowledging difficulty is rational. Complaint adds emotional resistance to that acknowledgement. One keeps you grounded in reality. The other pulls you away from it. A rational response might say, "This situation is difficult and requires adjustment." A complaint says, "This should not be happening." The difference appears small in language but large in effect. One leads to action, the other leads to stagnation. Each morning, remind yourself that the day will contain difficulty not as punishment, but as opportunity to practice stability. Without challenge, there is no practice of endurance. Without resistance, there is no opportunity to strengthen discipline. When hardship appears, do not rush to express it outwardly. Do not immediately translate it into complaint. Pause internally and return to reason. Ask what response remains available that preserves your character, then act accordingly. Over time, this practice changes how you experience life. You stop seeing hardship as interruption and begin seeing it as context for discipline. You stop interpreting discomfort as injustice and begin interpreting it as material for growth in rational strength. And slowly, complaint loses its place in your inner life because it is no longer useful to you. What remains is endurance guided by reason and action guided by clarity, even in the presence of difficulty that cannot be avoided. Number 8. Act deliberately and refuse the pull of impulse. The moment you feel the urge to act immediately, you are already inside the most dangerous state of mind you experience each day. Not danger from the world, but danger from yourself. In that moment, impulse has already begun to speak louder than reason, and if you do not intervene, your actions will follow whatever emotion is currently strongest, rather than whatever judgment is correct. You call it spontaneity, you call it intuition, you call it being real, but much of what you call instinct is simply unexamined reaction moving faster than your awareness, and when reaction leads, you do not choose your life, you are pushed through it. Every regretful action you can remember has one thing in common. It was done too quickly for reason to fully examine it. A word spoken in anger, a decision made in excitement, a commitment made under pressure, a withdrawal made in fear. The pattern is always the same. Impulse arrives first, reason arrives too late, and consequence follows without negotiation. This is why the disciplined life begins not with more action, but with controlled action. Acting deliberately means nothing enters behavior without passing through awareness. It means you do not allow internal pressure to become external behavior without examination. It means there is always a space between feeling and doing where reason is allowed to decide. Impulse does not ask whether something is correct. It asks whether something feels urgent. It compresses time. It removes reflection. It demands immediate release into action. And if you obey it without resistance, your life becomes a sequence of reactions that you later struggle to justify. You are not weak because impulses exist. You are weak only when you allow them to govern without question. The first step in breaking this pattern is recognition. You must begin to see impulse not as instruction but as raw signal. A signal is not yet guidance, it requires interpretation. Hunger is a signal, but not every urge to act is correct. Anger is a signal, but not every expression of it is justified. Fear is a signal, but not every fear requires obedience. Between signal and action lies judgment, and judgment is where your life is shaped. Most people skip judgment entirely. They move directly from feeling to action. They say things they have not considered. They commit to things they have not evaluated. They withdraw from things they have not understood. And then they live inside the consequences of decisions they never consciously made. Deliberate action begins with interruption, the interruption of automatic response, the refusal to let immediacy define behavior. When impulse arises, you do not suppress it blindly, but you do not obey it immediately either. You pause long enough for reason to arrive. That pause is where discipline exists. You must learn to treat urgency with suspicion. Not every feeling of urgency reflects importance. Often, urgency is simply discomfort demanding resolution. The mind dislikes tension and tries to resolve it quickly, even if the resolution is irrational. This creates actions that reduce discomfort in the moment, but create disorder in the long term. A deliberate mind does not trust urgency automatically. It asks whether action is necessary or whether patience would produce a better outcome. It questions whether the impulse is aligned with reason or merely seeking emotional release. This questioning changes everything. Without it, you are constantly pushed by internal pressure. With it, you begin to direct your responses. You stop being a receiver of impulses and become an evaluator of them. Each morning should begin with this discipline already established. Before the day introduces external triggers, you prepare yourself for internal ones. You remind yourself that thoughts will arise quickly, emotions will fluctuate, and impulses will attempt to convert feeling into action without reflection. This is not abnormal. It is human nature untrained. But untrained nature is not the final state. It is material for discipline. You must also understand that impulse often disguises itself as necessity. It tells you that if you do not act immediately, something will be lost. It creates imagined consequences for inaction in order to force movement. But most of these imagined consequences are not grounded in reality. They are mental constructions designed to avoid discomfort. Deliberation requires the willingness to endure temporary discomfort in exchange for correct action. It requires resisting the mind's demand for immediate resolution. It requires tolerating the tension of not acting until clarity is present. That tension is not a problem. It is training. Every time you resist impulse and wait for reason, you strengthen the part of yourself capable of self-governance. Every time you obey impulse without examination, you weaken that same capacity. This is not philosophical abstraction. It is repetition shaping identity. You are always training something within yourself, either disciplined response or reactive behavior. Observe how often impulse is driven by emotional intensity rather than rational necessity. A moment of irritation produces immediate speech. A moment of desire produces immediate pursuit. A moment of fear produces immediate avoidance. None of these are evaluated. They are executed as if emotion alone is sufficient justification. But emotion is not sufficient justification. It is information requiring assessment. Deliberate action begins when you stop confusing emotional intensity with correctness. Just because something feels strong does not mean it deserves expression. Strength of feeling is not equivalent to truth. It is simply strength of activation in the mind. You must learn to hold feelings without converting them into immediate behavior. This does not mean suppression. It means containment until reason has evaluated their direction. When you practice this consistently, something important begins to shift. You notice that many impulses lose authority when not acted upon immediately. Anger weakens when not expressed instantly. Fear loses intensity when not obeyed immediately. Desire becomes clearer when not followed reflexively. Impulse depends on immediacy. Remove immediacy and its power reduces. Deliberation restores hierarchy to the mind. Reason becomes primary. Emotion becomes secondary. Action becomes the final result of evaluation rather than the first expression of feeling. This hierarchy is essential for stability. Without it, your life becomes emotionally reactive. With it, your life becomes intentionally directed. In daily practice, this means introducing a pause in all moments of strong internal pressure. When you feel the urge to respond quickly, you stop and observe. You do not deny the impulse, but you do not obey it. You allow space for clarity to form. In that space, you ask whether action is necessary, whether timing is appropriate, and whether response aligns with rational judgment. Only after this evaluation do you proceed. This habit slowly transforms your behavior. You begin to notice fewer impulsive mistakes. You begin to experience less regret from words or actions taken too quickly. You begin to act in alignment with your values rather than your momentary emotional state. You also begin to see how much of your previous life was governed by unexamined reaction, how many decisions were made in emotional haste, how many conflicts were escalated unnecessarily, how many opportunities were missed because fear acted faster than reason. This realization is not meant to create guilt. It is meant to create precision moving forward. The purpose of discipline is not to judge the past, but to refine the present moment. Each new moment offers the same choice: immediate reaction or deliberate response, impulse or reason, pressure or clarity. When you choose deliberation repeatedly, your identity shifts. You begin to see yourself not as someone who reacts to life, but as someone who responds to it with intention. This shift changes how you experience responsibility. You stop feeling controlled by circumstances because you are no longer surrendering behavior to impulse. Even in difficult situations, you retain a space of internal control where reason can operate. This is where true autonomy exists, not in controlling external events, but in controlling the speed and quality of your response to them. You are not required to eliminate emotion. You are required to prevent emotion from acting without examination. Emotion can inform, but it must not command. When you master this distinction, your life becomes less chaotic, not because external conditions change, but because internal reactions are no longer automatic. Each morning, remind yourself that today will present moments where impulse feels faster than reason. Your task is not to eliminate those moments, but to refuse immediate obedience to them. You will feel pressure to act quickly. You will feel discomfort in waiting. But within that discomfort lies the development of discipline. Over time, deliberation becomes natural. You no longer feel the need to rush into every response. You begin to trust the pause. You begin to rely on reason as the final authority before action. And in that practice, impulse loses its power not through force, but through consistent refusal to obey it without examination. Number 9. Review your conduct each evening without self-deception. The day does not end when your tasks are finished. It ends when your mind is confronted with the truth of how you lived it. And most people avoid this confrontation because it removes the comfort of self-image. It exposes the gap between what you intended to be and what you actually did. So they distract themselves, they move forward blindly, they sleep without examination, and they repeat the same internal disorder the next day. You are not disturbed because your day was difficult. You are disturbed because you never fully examined how you responded to it. You carry unresolved reactions forward, uncorrected judgments, unnoticed impulses, and unchallenged excuses. And because they remain unexamined, they silently shape the next day as well. This is why evening reflection is not optional for a disciplined mind. It is the moment where self-deception is either corrected or preserved. Without it, you live under the illusion that progress is occurring simply because time is passing. With it, you are forced to see whether your actions actually aligned with reason or whether you were guided by impulse, avoidance, or emotional reaction. The undisciplined mind fears this moment of review. It avoids honest inspection because honesty removes comfort. It prefers vague impressions of the day rather than precise evaluation. It says the day was fine or the day was difficult without examining what was actually done. But vague reflection produces no growth. It only preserves self-image without accountability. You must learn to see your conduct as something that can be examined without distortion. Not to punish yourself, but to understand yourself clearly. Every action you took today originated from a judgment. That judgment was either aligned with reason or influenced by impulse. The purpose of evening reflection is to distinguish between the two. Without this distinction, patterns repeat unnoticed. You react the same way to similar situations. You make similar mistakes under similar pressure. You justify them differently each time, but the underlying behavior remains unchanged. This repetition is not fate. It is lack of awareness. When you sit in reflection at the end of the day, you are not judging your worth as a person. You are examining your use of reason. Did you act with clarity, or did you surrender to immediate reaction? Did you follow principle, or did you follow comfort? Did you choose what was right, or what was easiest in the moment? These questions are not emotional. They are structural. They reveal how your mind functioned throughout the day. Most people avoid this because they confuse honesty with self-attack. But self-examination is not self-condemnation, it is correction. A rational mind does not fear correction because correction is how it improves. Only ego resists being seen clearly. You must separate identity from action. You are not your mistakes. You are the being capable of recognizing and correcting them. But if you refuse to look at them, they remain uncorrected and begin to define your future behavior indirectly. Evening review begins by recalling the day without distortion. Not how you wish it had gone, but how it actually unfolded. You observe where you acted with reason and where you acted under impulse. You observe where you spoke without thinking and where you remained silent when you should have acted. You observe where you delayed unnecessarily and where you responded correctly. This is not memory for comfort. It is memory for accuracy. Once you observe your actions, you then examine the judgments behind them. Every action is preceded by an internal interpretation. You reacted because you believed something about the situation. That belief must be tested. Was it accurate or was it shaped by emotion? Was it grounded in reality or influenced by assumption? This is where most people avoid depth. They stop at behavior. But behavior is only the surface. The real training occurs at the level of judgment. If your judgments remain unexamined, your actions will continue repeating their patterns regardless of intention. The goal of evening reflection is not to feel good about the day. It is to understand it clearly enough to improve the next one. You will notice patterns if you are honest. You will see recurring moments where impulse overruled reason. You will see situations where comfort replaced discipline. You will see times where external pressure influenced your response more than internal principle. These are not failures to hide. They are material for training. Each recognition is an opportunity to strengthen awareness for tomorrow. Without recognition, there is no adjustment. Without adjustment, behavior remains unchanged. Without change, time passes without progress. Self-deception enters when you reinterpret mistakes to protect self-image instead of understanding them. You say it was not your fault without examining your role. You say circumstances were unfair without examining your response. You say you had no choice without examining where choice actually existed. These interpretations preserve comfort but destroy clarity. Clarity requires willingness to see where you had control and where you failed to use it. At the end of the day, you must ask whether your actions aligned with rational discipline or whether they were driven by reactive patterns. This question cuts through excuses. It does not concern external validation. It concerns internal governance. Did I act with reason? Did I abandon reason? Where did I lose control of my response? Where did I maintain it? These are the only relevant measures in a rational review. When you practice this consistently, something important happens. Your awareness during the day increases because you know it will be reviewed. You begin to catch impulses earlier. You begin to notice judgments forming before they become action. You begin to act with more intention because you are no longer blind to your own patterns. Evening reflection strengthens daytime discipline. It connects awareness across time. Without it, each day becomes isolated. With it, each day becomes part of a continuous process of refinement. You must also be willing to examine not only actions but omissions. What did you fail to do that reason indicated was necessary? What responsibility was ignored? What opportunity for disciplined action was avoided? Omission is often more revealing than action because it shows where resistance was strongest. Many people only examine what they did. Few examine what they avoided doing. But avoidance is where character is most clearly tested. When you identify where avoidance occurred, do not respond with judgmental self-attack. Respond with understanding and correction. The purpose is not to create emotional weight, but to increase future clarity. Self-examination without correction is incomplete. Correction without awareness is impossible. The disciplined approach combines both. As you continue this practice, you will begin to notice a reduction in self-deception throughout the day. You will become more aware of how quickly the mind constructs justifications in real time. You will see how easily it defends impulse before reflection. And because you are training yourself to review at night, you will begin interrupting those patterns earlier. This creates a feedback loop of increasing awareness. Reflection improves perception. Improved perception improves action. Improved action reduces the need for correction. But reflection remains essential because it maintains honesty. Each evening, you are not trying to become perfect. You are trying to become aware. Awareness is what allows correction. Without awareness, repetition continues unconsciously. Sit with your day in quiet honesty. Remove exaggeration. Remove justification. Remove emotional reinterpretation. See what actually happened in your conduct. Not to condemn yourself, but to understand where reason was present and where it was absent. Then carry that understanding into the next morning with intention to act more clearly. In this way, your life becomes a continuous cycle of observation, correction, and deliberate action guided by reason rather than habit or illusion. Number 10. Live now as reason and virtue command. Right now is the only place where your life is actually happening. Not in memory, not in anticipation, not in regret. Those are mental movements, not living reality. Yet most of your suffering is built from leaving the present moment and entering those mental spaces as if they were more important than the task standing in front of you. You already know this pattern, even if you rarely confront it directly. You delay what matters by imagining a better moment later. You escape discomfort by replaying the past. You weaken action by projecting fear into the future. And while the mind travels everywhere else, the only moment where your character is formed is neglected. To live now as reason and virtue command means to stop treating the present moment as a bridge to somewhere else. It is not a waiting room. It is the only field where your discipline is tested and expressed. Every other time exists only in thought. Only now contains action. You do not suffer because life is happening. You suffer because you are not fully present within it. You split yourself into reaction and avoidance. One part of you engages the world, while another part judges it without discipline. That internal division creates instability. You are never fully governing yourself because attention is always partially elsewhere. Reason does not operate in abstraction. It operates here, in what is directly in front of you. Virtue is not a distant ideal. It is how you speak in this moment, how you respond in this moment, how you choose in this moment. If you are not applying it now, you are not applying it at all. The mind that avoids the present always finds excuses. It says conditions are not right yet. It says emotions are too strong right now. It says clarity will come later, but later never arrives as a moment of perfect readiness. It arrives as another present moment, already occupied by distraction, unless you intervene. You must see how often you betray reason, not through dramatic failure, but through small departures from it. A reactive word spoken without reflection, a task delayed without necessity, a distraction accepted without awareness. Each one seems minor in isolation, but together they form a pattern of living without full presence. Virtue requires presence because virtue requires choice, and choice can only happen where attention is. When you are lost in memory, you are not choosing. When you are lost in anticipation, you are not choosing. When you are reacting automatically, you are not choosing. In all these states, life is happening to you rather than being guided by you. To return to now is to return to control over yourself. Each morning, you must begin by removing the assumption that your day will unfold in your favor without deliberate governance. It will not. It will unfold according to your responses, not your expectations, and those responses must be guided by reason, not impulse. The undisciplined mind enters the day already scattered. It carries unresolved thoughts from yesterday and imagined concerns about tomorrow. It arrives in the present moment already divided. That division makes rational action harder because attention is not unified. You must begin by gathering yourself into one point of awareness, not to control external events, but to control internal direction. Ask yourself what is required of you now, not what might be required later. This question anchors you in reality instead of projection. When you act from reason in the present moment, your actions align with what is actually happening rather than what is imagined. This reduces unnecessary struggle. Most difficulty arises not from present conditions, but from resistance to present conditions. That resistance is created by thoughts that do not belong to now. Virtue is expressed when you stop adding unnecessary interpretation to what is already clear. If something must be done, you do it. If something is outside your control, you accept it. If something requires patience, you remain steady. If something requires correction, you correct it. There is no need to escape the moment to determine this. Reason is sufficient when applied directly. The problem is not lack of knowledge. It is lack of presence. You already know what aligns with discipline in most situations. The difficulty arises when you leave the present moment and allow imagination or emotion to distort clarity. In imagination, tasks feel heavier than they are. In memory, mistakes feel more defining than they are. In anticipation, challenges feel more overwhelming than they are. Returning to now dissolves these distortions. Living now also means refusing to let emotional momentum dictate behavior without examination. Emotions arise quickly, but they are not instructions. They are signals requiring interpretation. When you remain present, you can observe them before they become action. When you leave presence, they become behavior automatically. This is why awareness is essential. Not abstract awareness, but immediate awareness of what is happening inside you as it happens. You must learn to notice when attention leaves the present moment. It leaves through regret, through planning, through distraction, through emotional replay. Each departure reduces your capacity to act wisely. Each return restores it. Presence is not passive observation. It is active engagement with what is real. When you are fully present, even simple actions become deliberate. Speech becomes measured. Decisions become clearer. Reactions slow enough to be examined. This does not mean life becomes slower. It means your relationship to it becomes more intentional. Most wasted effort comes from acting without presence. You respond to something without fully understanding it. You commit to something without full awareness. You withdraw from something without full clarity. And later you try to repair consequences that were created by absence of attention. Presence prevents unnecessary correction later because it ensures correctness at the moment of action. Living as reason and virtue command requires constant return to this state, not perfection, but return. You will leave presence many times in a day. The discipline is not in never leaving, but in recognizing when you have and coming back without delay. Each return strengthens control over your inner life. Each moment of presence reinforces rational authority over impulse. You must also understand that virtue is not separate from daily activity. It is not something added on to life. It is how life is lived when governed correctly. Speaking honestly is virtue in action. Responding calmly under pressure is virtue in action. Completing tasks with discipline is virtue in action. Refraining from unnecessary reaction is virtue in action. Nothing external needs to change for virtue to be practiced. Only attention needs to be directed correctly in the present moment. The mind often resists this simplicity because it prefers complexity over responsibility. It prefers abstract ideals over immediate action. But reason does not operate in abstraction. It operates in decisions being made right now. When you live in the present moment guided by reason, you remove unnecessary layers of suffering. You stop reacting to imagined conditions and start responding to actual ones. You stop measuring life through past failure or future anxiety and start engaging directly with what is real. This does not eliminate difficulty. It eliminates confusion. Confusion arises when attention is divided across time. Clarity arises when attention is gathered in the present. Virtue becomes possible only when clarity exists, because virtue depends on correct perception of what is required now. Each moment is a test of whether you are present enough to act correctly or lost enough to act mechanically. That test is continuous. It does not wait for special circumstances. It is happening in ordinary speech, ordinary decisions, ordinary reactions. To live now as reason and virtue command is to refuse postponement of discipline. It is to refuse emotional drift into past or future. It is to treat the present moment as the only place where your character is being formed. When you begin to live this way consistently, life becomes less fragmented. You are no longer scattered across mental time. You are here, acting with clarity, correcting yourself when needed, and aligning each action with rational judgment. And in that alignment, you stop waiting for transformation and begin expressing it directly through how you live now.